Hey Jake, you know Phil Spector, General Murderer, Bad Taste in Wigs, really brilliant pop musician.
I'm
You know him, right?
familiar. Yeah.
Okay, so I think more than anything, one of his most important contributions to music is the song Be My Baby by the Ronettes. It's a song which forever will be immortalized by this opening drum beat that goes boom, boom, boom. It's been imitated like 100 times in different songs. And the album we're about to talk about today completely rips that strategy wholesale in its first song.
Oh, no.
That's right, it's Twin Fantasy Cast, baby.
God damn. You hate to see it.
My boy, we don't see each other
All right. Well, yes.
much.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to I guess you could say, special edition episode of the Indieheads podcast. I'm Jake, and today with me as well we have.
Rose, yeah, so this is episode like 5 or 6 of the Decade Casts. We're going strong here, you know? Just followed up fucking Worry, which was also, I'm sure, a nightmare. And after this will be To Pimp a Butterfly, so you know we're really just going all over the place. But today, yeah, we are talking about two albums in one. That's right, you get a package deal because it's the same fucking album twice.
Yeah, that was sort of like a conscious decision when we're making the list. There's
Yeah,
really no point separating them.
I feel like you really can't talk about one without the other, especially the newer edition. The
Oh
Car
yeah.
Seat Headrest Twin Fantasy is perhaps one of the weirdest rock albums to hit any sort of like not critical success, I would say, but like, just people like this in a way that
Yeah.
none of the other Car Seat Headrest albums do, or rock records in
It's
general seem to. It's got a fervor around it that,
it's definitely like a cult album, you could say,
yeah,
for
like
lack of a better
it's
term. Like,
conjured by the internet.
yeah, exactly.
So, for context, the original record was released the 2nd of November 2011, and the latter version was released the 16th of February 2018. Between those versions, Will Toledo pretty much got an entire backing band and released, let's see how many other albums. One, two, three, four, five more albums if you include an outtakes record
Well,
between then and.
then How to Leave Town also,
Oh yeah,
if that one
true.
wasn't included in there. Just
Yeah, well, that's an EP if you want to listen to his crap.
I'll argue with him personally about this EP
Yeah,
status of
listen,
that, but
if I'd had the guts to 5 years ago or so, actually no, 4 years ago when I saw Will Toledo in a bathroom, I would have yelled at him about how to Leave Town could not be an EP. But
that is
that's something to argue with my teenage self about.
yeah. So I
Whew.
mean, yeah, like what's a good way to kind of dive in here? I feel like there's so many different like
Well, I feel
openings.
like the first thing you need to talk about is the distinguishment between the two versions of the album because they are like night and day in a sense, even though they are essentially the same songs.
Yeah.
They're each about an hour or so of music to get into. Well,
Yes.
one runs a little under, I think, and one runs a little over.
I want to say Face to Face, the new version is about 10 minutes longer.
Yeah, about 11 minutes longer. Face to Face is 1 hour 12, and Mirror to Mirror, the 2011 version, is an hour and 1 minute.
Okay, yeah,
Which is still like either way a solid chunk of music.
yeah,
Like
for real.
Will Toledo since up to 2014, I would say, because that's like when he wrote the last album before the upcoming one.
Yeah,
When he wrote that, he was putting out gargantuan amounts of music,
I know. Yeah,
especially for a home recording project.
I mean, even Teens of Style is like a solid
Yeah,
46 minutes or something like that.
Teens of Style is 47, but that's like average album length. Like that's
Yeah,
bordering on normal for him.
right.
And then Denial is like around Twin Fantasy 2018 length.
Yeah, so we're basically here discussing like 2 hours of content.
2 hours of very similar content that is mired in like extremely weird history and internet
Yeah,
fandom that
a lot of
cannot be
lore.
described.
Yeah, so there's an interesting amount of like I feel like lore is a weird word to
Yeah,
use here, but
like
it kind of is.
backstory perhaps.
Yeah, yeah,
To quote an interview that Will Toledo did, he only did like 2 interviews before the release of the 2018 version, considering since the a real like start of the new iteration of the project, like Car Seat Headrest 2.0 with his full band members, like he's very much retreated away from press shit, which is understandable considering he seems to be a very private person about his art. But at the same time, too, I think one of the most interesting things, like the first thing to really distinguish the two records is this one thing he said about perspective. So he says, it becomes clear once you listen to the album, it puts the focus on perspective. They're both looking at the same subject, filtered through a particular perspective, my own, and that's changed over the years. And when asked what informs the shift, he kind of says just he grew up spending time with people doing different things, and my understanding of my own life has changed. I don't want to dismiss the things that were important to me in the past, but I want to reconcile them with how I'm living now. And in some
yeah.
sense, like, that's like the thesis of the twin fantasy story with 2018 and 2011 is just growing up.
Right, and I mean, you can definitely, I mean, at least in even the act of releasing it again, like making a re-recorded version, it's sort of kind of like exactly what he just said. It's almost like a 3D perspective of these kind of personal events for him. Like you get both the perspective of kind of being in it, and then also the perspective of being removed from it and kind of looking at it retrospectively from like a more mature kind of adult perspective, especially considering the first album is such like a raw, like
It,
angsty
it is
experience.
it is the sound of a teenager recording rock music about the reasons he's feeling really fucking sad,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I can get behind it.
Yeah, exactly.
I could especially get behind it, say 5 or so years ago when I heard it for the first time, and
Yep.
it broke my heart.
Hmm.
This album has been fundamental to me in my both my emotional capacity and my understanding of rock music in the modern era.
Right. Yeah.
It's massive. And I suppose like the other, so of course like the thing about the 2018 version is like he'd always kind of planned it that way once he started really putting the band into a mode of professionalism because he saw it as an unfinished work, which
Yeah.
can be translated both in an emotional capacity and like a musical way. Like the original musical version, for those of you who have only heard the 2018 version, is like this very raw and hazy recording with like really shitty drums and bass.
Yeah. I
To
mean,
put it simply, like that's those are not to get too critical, but that's the one thing that I always like think about is just like, oh god, these drums.
I know. I've always been curious about just the logistics of that because I remember reading somewhere that he didn't even like a lot of the songs on the original version didn't even have bass because he
Oh
just
yeah, I'm
didn't
sure.
have one, and the guitar itself is just recorded literally into a MacBook microphone on GarageBand, like the most basic kind of tools possible.
And it's impressive in some sense that like he was able to engineer this kind of alchemy out of like turning something incredibly rudimentary into perhaps like
Yeah,
a very evocative piece of art.
it honestly makes like no sense. I don't know,
It's
like
magic, especially when you consider like looking at his discography before that, like in 2010 he put out five, if you want to count the outtakes of the
yeah,
first four, 4 or 5 albums of just like weird raw songs which were all on numbered albums, 1, 2, 3, and 4. None of
yeah,
these had any coherent like album structure. Most of the songs were like weird sketches. Like there's maybe like up until 3 and 4, there's very few, like, coherent, like, songs that you would recognize as like, "Oh, yeah, this is a Car Seat
Yeah,
Headrest song," as you would expect now.
and he went from that sort of like style of songwriting to what is Twin Fantasy in pretty much the span of like a year.
So 4 was released the 16th of August 2010. My Back Is Killing Me, Baby was released sometime in October of 2011. And then a month later, he put out Twin Fantasy. I don't know if these Rate Your Music timelines are right, but
But still,
dear
like
Lord.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it is insane to see in any capacity, like a songwriter level up that much. And I don't think we see
Hmm.
many artists doing that these days. Oh, hang on. So My Back was released in March of 2011, and then
Okay.
yeah, Twin Fantasy was November.
Right. 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 Yeah. I mean, that is just to kind of circle back real quick to what you were saying earlier about how this was sort of kind of pre-planned in a way, or like at least he had the idea of re-recording this album for a while before it. I think they started to record it or whatever, because I think he said something about how when he originally signed with Matador, like
Yeah, it was
that was
part of
the
his
plan.
contract. His plan was Teens of Style, which is like, all the it's basically a greatest hits album of the
Hmm.
early era, like the early era plus Monomania.
Right.
Considering
Um,
that absolutely nothing off Nervous Young Man got touched. Then Teens of Denial, which was like the new material, quote unquote. Or
yep.
it actually it was, because like when he signed, it was basically a year after he'd written it.
Right.
And then finally, Twin Fantasy 2018.
And there's kind of, I mean, if you think about it, like looking just at the track list of Teens of Style, like the fact that no Twin Fantasy songs are on Teens of Style should have sort of been an indication that he was planning on doing something. So it's like, why else wouldn't he like re-record any of the songs on what is at this point like his most acclaimed album?
I mean, in
Um,
some sense, yeah, but like also you have to like it's interesting just because like it's impossible to capture all the greatest hits in some sense, but
right.
like seeing him not record from either of like the big albums up to that point, or any of the like big material that he'd had up to that point, not revisiting it, was certainly weird. But like Twin Fantasy especially, I feel like is an odd one to leave off because
Yeah.
it is arguably like a giant step.
Right. I mean, you could. I mean, I suppose it's sort of easy to say that in retrospect.
Yeah,
Like you could have made the argument like, oh well, that's too much of a kind of coherent
commitment. Yeah,
unit.
like
You don't
especially like
divorce those songs from the context or whatever.
yeah, exactly, like ripping them out from that overall arc might have been a little weird.
Yeah, and then I also guess you could make the argument that Nervous Young Man, although still very much a quote unquote lo-fi album, that could probably stand on its own, like production wise, better than kind of the ones that came before that.
Oh yeah, that's very true. Like the thing about Nervous Young Man is, while it still kind of sounds questionable in quality to the lo-fi format, it's not like the worst thing on the planet. Like Will is actually kind of finally getting his skills together for
Definitely.
making a home recording setup.
Yeah, I mean, even the difference between that album and the original Twin Fantasy is pretty apparent.
Yeah, I mean, with like 2 years time, he'd actually kind of become a competent song producer as
Yeah,
well as
no,
writer.
definitely. Yeah, for sure.
And it shows, considering that he pretty much, after Teens of Denial, he stuck to producing all his own work from then on. Like, even with the new album, he's doing it.
Yep, yeah, and I mean, I think How to Leave Town as well is just produced in his home. I'm presuming, and that album is
Yeah, somewhere.
great production. Yeah, somewhere.
And I guess, like, I really want to avoid the track by track if we can. But like, if we want to like pick and choose, like
Yeah,
like individual songs that we feel like are worth talking about in the arc, because I feel
sure.
like that is one way to put it. But yeah, earlier, like I think this album, one of its great strengths is like those little parts that you just remember. Like, some people will always like talk about like, oh yeah, I love this part of the song. Like,
Hmm.
but like this album has just
Tons of them.
tons of them, because this is like one of the peak albums for Will Toledo's old writing approach,
Yes.
which he pretty much nailed down since 2014, which is like you stack hooks on top of hooks on top of hooks and just
Yeah.
build little moments in there that will immediately stand out to any listener. It's really crazy.
Twin Fantasy is nothing but choruses, to be honest. It's just
Yeah.
like chorus on chorus. I mean, okay, so to avoid doing track by track, let's
Yeah.
just talk about Beach Life and Death, you
Yeah,
know?
I mean, yeah,
Why not?
starting with the big one, like
I mean, come on.
this is honestly the song that I think would define his career up until 2016, really. It's like
Yeah, I mean,
maybe not his most popular because that title goes to Bodies, which we'll get to later.
yes.
But like it is perhaps the one that most defines the writing style he's going for.
Definitely. And I think that I think Beach Life and Death is the first of Will's like ultra long songs. I'm not super familiar with the numbered albums, so I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is his first like 10-minute plus like flagship epic kind of song.
It's very gargantuan. I feel he put some attempts before at like making longer and more, you know, detailed structure into his music up to that point.
Right.
Like occasionally on the I believe it was either number 3 or number 4, there's The Ghost of Bob Saget that stretches around 7 minutes,
That's true.
As well as Dickless Heart, which are both like pretty lengthy songs that at least get
Hmm.
into it. And like still though, like nothing before that point really stretched above like 10 minutes or even came close to it really. And so just hearing him nail it so perfectly on the first fucking try is like, and
Exactly.
actually, unless you want to count like the Nervous Young Men material that came before that,
Oh,
like
that is
that's
true.
his. For those of you who don't know, that's like his band that exists before Car Seat Headrest, and really does not. Like you can't find much of them online anymore because he erased most of the records of that, understandably.
So I actually think Boxing Day then would
Yeah, Boxing
technically.
Day was like the first real fucking long song, and even then, it's like that's a goddamn perfect song. Like
I know.
he's naturally gifted at writing like ridiculously lengthy songs and kind of getting the structure right and how to do it. And Beach Life in particular is like this three-part epic that is
Hmm.
really worth looking at. Like each of them kind of comes distinctly and could be its own song, but as a whole they work like insanely well together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is split into three distinct parts, but they are also very intertwined, both like lyrically and there's sort of like musical motifs that will kind of show up in all three parts as well. And like you were mentioning earlier about like there's all these specific kind of like moments on Twin Fantasy that are really amazing. I feel like
This
even like
one
just within
is,
this song, there's so many.
yeah,
Um,
like, and in some sense like you like also like it is an album that I think couldn't have been made before the numbered ones. Like if he had started out here, like you wouldn't really have the context of that, of
yeah.
like, because those earlier albums also tell the stories of the protagonist of the 2011 version.
Well, that's the other fun thing about like just the fact that he recorded two versions of this because it's already just such a weird meta self-referential kind of idea. But even the original Twin Fantasy in itself is already sort of meta and self-referential to like work before 2011
Yeah, like
when he had yeah.
in album 3, yeah, it's just titled 3 to make sure you all understand this. There are 4 songs on the or no, 5 songs on the album. There's Beach Week, Beach Fags, Beach Drugs, Beach Death, and Beach Funeral.
Yeah.
And those are all like very fundamental ones that kind of tell very personal stories from Will. And then Beach Life and Death is almost like a referential work to that,
Yeah, exactly.
which it gets into later in the lyrics
Well,
in
right.
very disconcerting ways almost. But like the first part of this song is this rambling story which just tells like literally like if you know anybody who has heard this song, they can like recite this first part word for word because it's like so specific.
Yeah, no, I know. Um and I guess like so you could say that this album follows like a sort of loose narrative. I mean,
I mean, yeah, like it is very much like it's a breakup album to put it specifically. Like it, the characters sort of there's that love scene at the beginning. You can almost describe the first song as
right, yeah, right,
a
exactly.
big motif, and then like the kind of slow delusion into the dream madness that is the later songs, and then eventually like the actual like, oh shit, things are falling apart because it's not actually that good.
Yeah, right, exactly. And like, I mean, not to like speculate too much on
Oh
like
yeah, absolutely.
Will's
That's the
personal life.
last thing anyone should do at this point after like, yeah, I know.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying like that you're doing that. Just like in
Or you
general,
are for that matter.
right? But like, I guess you could say that like the one of the main ideas here is the sort of kind of creating a character for someone inside your head who's not like actually representative of the real person, and like holding them to standards that aren't real, and just sort of making up this like fictionalized narrative in your head that is kind of not how things are in reality. And I feel like that sort of narrative begins in this song here.
Yeah, yeah, like in some sense, like one of the great themes of the album is like, like of both versions of the album is creating an ideal of like what you'd rather this thing be rather than what it is.
Right. Yeah.
Like not only in the music, but in like the story of like creating a fictional version of your romance that is somehow more perfected for you.
Yes. Yes. Uh,
Like literally, if you listen to the monologue on the original version of Nervous Young and Humans, like it is perhaps one of the most uncomfortable things I've heard
I
in a
know.
song. Because you can literally hear him like just start to regret every decision he's making.
I know. Yeah. It's so interesting to hear him. Just like the last line of the song is like talking about how he regrets writing the song. Um, which, by the way, slight tangent here. I'm
Oh,
like,
go ahead.
it's so hilarious to me that galvanistic is not actually a real word.
Yeah, like
That's
that's
how he
part
took
of
it
like
out.
the people online complained when. So to give you an idea of the rollout of the latter version of Twin Fantasy, because I think it is kind of important to understand like the big hype with it.
Hmm.
Yeah, so the first real sign that things were going on, that things were afoot, was late 2017. I don't remember exactly when, but Twin Fantasy, along with Nervous Young Man, suddenly disappeared from streaming. Nervous Young Man got put up like a week later. It got put back up for after some samples were removed, or
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
samples, but like Will was stealing lyrics again. It got
Yeah.
caught.
Right.
Rick Ocasek's out to get you.
Damn.
But Twin Fantasy did not return to streaming service, and immediately people were like, "What is up?" Because like that album is like the rock in their discography up till Denial, pretty much.
Right.
And then suddenly in mid-December to on the 13th, Beach Life and Death appeared on streaming services again, but in a completely new form. There was no announcement about this. It just dropped.
Ah, yeah. I like forgot that that was the first one he put out.
Yeah, like he decided that apparently Will was like frustrated with how long it was taking to get the Matador rollout going. So he's just like asked them like, "Can I drop this one song with just no impression and let people know what's coming?"
I'm glad they let him, honestly.
Yeah, honestly, because like I feel like if the introduction to the album had been the real like first single, which was Nervous Young and Humans, I feel like people would have reacted very differently
Oh,
from the
absolutely.
2011,
Yeah, I mean, for
because like 2018 Beach Life is like such a like I feel like Beach Life is a big statement of a song, not just for itself, but like for the album as a whole. Like when you listen to it, it's like this is this album. This
yeah,
is Twin Fantasy. And in contrast, like Nervous Young and Humans getting put as the lead, quote unquote lead single to the album is mystifying, especially when you consider like how weird the new version is. If you want to talk
Yeah.
about that.
Well, no, I mean, like, I definitely agree with what you're saying. I feel like Nervous Young and Humans, just from like a sonic perspective, is maybe one of the most changed songs from version to version. Um, Maybe not like structurally, but like definitely in how it sounds. Like it's way more
Yeah,
electronic.
musically, it's a gigantic alteration. Like it's been turned into this really kind of surfy, like the thing about the original version is I would describe a lot of the guitars as surfy.
Yeah, which I think is like a fair kind of like. I don't think he was necessarily going for that
Yeah, I
vibe, but
don't
I
think
feel
he's
like
going for that. It just happens because that's what he had as a
it's
setup.
it's the Beach Boys like worm in his brain, making all his songs sound surfy.
You
um,
know, and the man just wants to sound like fucking pop music. Like that's
I mean,
always been
hey,
his goal.
exactly, and he does it well. I mean, and that's the thing about Nervous Young and Humans is that he also like added. He didn't. I want
Not
to say he
add, but
changed
change,
the
altered the
melody.
lyrics in a way, and like shuffle the song around in a way that I think can only really be contextualized by, you know, the new versions. Like the original song is just a monologue describing his feelings in that
Yeah.
moment
Hmm.
about what he's saying in that song and like how to really interpret it. And the 2018 version is more of a like loose monologue that's a perspective of time and the way it kind of draws back on you.
Yeah, it was honestly kind of hard for me to. I was reading the new Nervous Young and Humans monologue today, and I was having a little trouble wrapping my head around it completely. I feel like I don't know. I feel like with this album you could write a whole like book report on some of the stuff that he's saying.
I mean, I did,
Um,
and then Will really liked it.
oh yeah, wait, what was
That
that
was
again?
the thing I did like 2 years ago.
I totally forgot about that, but I do remember that actually.
It was
That's
very
amazing.
entertaining. A 3,000 word book report.
Yeah, it's honestly, if any album warrants that kind of deep dive,
It's
it's for
probably
sure
this
this.
one.
Yeah. But yeah, just since we're talking about um, Nervous Young in Humans, I just want to give a quick shout out to Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Everybody should go read Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Excellent, excellent novel.
Good book, very galvanistic.
It's very Calvinistic.
But my hot take, my first hot take is that 2011 Nervous Young and Humans is the worst track on the album because
Whoa, that is the hot.
it's where the recordings most impede its ability to sound like not necessarily good. Like I don't want to say that because that's mean,
That is a hot take, and I understand where you're coming from because
but
it's
like those drums get so muddy and weird in a way that like with the new version, like they just completely eliminate any chance of that
yeah.
happening by just like sequencing the drums rapidly, and it makes for a much more kind of like it goes for a much more like rhythmic, like
Hmm.
the original has a looseness to it that can only be described as like it feels like it is going to fall apart.
Right. Yeah, I mean the first one is also much less songy than the new version. Like there's not
Oh,
really a
true.
melody in the verse. He's just sort of like talking and then yeah, I can definitely understand the take, although I don't I'll not co-sign it, unfortunately.
Nobody would co-sign my takes.
um oh, by the way, just another quick thing that I wrote down that I thought was funny is that in the new version of Beach Life in Death, he made when he says, "Do you have something against dogs?" He made dogs go for like an
Oh
extra
yeah, it's like
measure.
way longer. It's just like he's being a show off about his vocal.
I know, and it's like
Like
thank God it's that line that got that like treatment.
yeah, like I think that's the thing about Beach Life and Death, and I'm gonna go back to it again because I feel like we're gonna keep going back to it
Right.
because it is essentially like again the statement of the album. It's like the
Yeah.
one that really makes sense. And so pretty much like he states himself like I think it's as good a barometer as anything for the album.
Oh yeah, I would agree. Like yeah, if you don't like Beach Life and Death, first of all, you know,
What is
get
wrong
out
with
of
you?
here. But second of all, like, yeah, you're probably not gonna be on board with the rest of it. What do you think of the new part in Beach Life and Death? The new little
So like Okay, for context, there is. I'm trying to remember. Is it just fucking? Is it just the Aubrey Beardsley art section?
That's the part that got taken out. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, just making sure, cause like, so for reference, there's a short section in Beach Life and Death, which is just like half of a verse. Like half of a verse gets taken out for this line that's originally a book of Aubrey Beardsley art corrupted me in youth, and now I'm trapped inside my youth, and you're in love with late stage youth. It's a very oh yeah, and there's like three more lines, but like who
Yeah.
cares? It's a very interestingly weird set of lines about like I don't know, just like the way you get captured in that moment
Yeah.
in some sense, and instead like Will decides instead to project new lines for something in order to move into it. So instead of that, he projects two new lines, which include a reference to Crow Killers, which is Kate Wertz's comic. For
Hmm.
those of you who don't know Kate Wertz, she was the original subject of the album in some sense.
Yeah.
Not going to speak about it much more than that because I
Yeah.
think you, at that point you start invading into the creepy personal territory that everyone seems to like realize is really awkward.
Right. I mean, I'd say that it's fine to bring her up in the sense that she was name dropped on the album.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Um,
that's another. That
a whole
song we'll
other
also have to
thing.
get to.
Yeah.
And then also there's an interpolation of a Frank Ocean line, but in order to avoid those copyright goons, he plays it backwards. Real clever there, Will.
I know. That way
You're not fooling anyone's shit.
Yeah, Frank Ocean and Rick Ocasek are gonna come after him again.
And Neil Young as well.
Yeah, right.
And also Roger Waters.
Damn. Poor Will.
Will's got like every major musician in the music industry coming after him for stealing their money. Those precious royalties.
What's the Roger Waters one? I don't think I'm familiar with
So
that.
there's like a dozen different Pink Floyd interpolations, and like the old ones. There's one he apparently took out of Hey Space Cadet.
Hmm.
There's one he literally took out of this album. It wasn't written by Roger Waters. It was a. Actually, we'll get to it later because I want to save that high discussion for later.
Fair, fair.
But yeah, part one of a Beach Life and Death, like in contrast with part two, the part that we just discussed is like this incredibly animated thing, and so you get to part two and this much more drawn in, measured kind of thing, but also it has like some of the most quotable lines on the song,
Yeah,
like the Satanist with braces and one capital O significant other. Like
yeah,
that entire section just drives me crazy. It's like it's so evocative and weird.
yeah. I was actually on Genius today, just kind of
Oh
poking around.
yeah, browsing
Yeah, and apparently that particular line, the Satanist with
is
braces,
also a reference to the comic.
yeah, also a reference to the Lame Zone comic, and then there's actually a picture of the character who's the Satanist
Yeah,
with braces, and I was like, oh, cool.
and I think like one of the like especially in this part of the song, like the theme of transcendence beyond like transcendence, the way you want your romance and like yourself to move beyond that, and
Right.
maybe like literally, I think the line that best gets it is uh in the first section, my soul yearns for a fugitive from the laws of nature.
Oh
Like
yeah, great line.
that in particular feels like a statement for what he's trying to achieve here in some sense. Like we
Yeah,
said we hated humans, we wanted to be humans. The idea that like you hate the reality of this, but you also want it to be like the perfect image of it.
yeah, very much kind of that like, I mean, twin fantasy.
Yeah,
It's all right
exactly.
there. Like,
It's like I think the entire album, in both like the physical recording sense and the actual thematic talk, can be projected by the image of duality.
yeah, yeah. Um, and that's yeah. I think what's funny about that also is Beach Life and Death is kind of the it's almost like a thematic centerpiece to the album, even though it's like right in the beginning.
Yeah, it's
Um,
literally 2 tracks in out of, like, 12
but then it's like
or
so
10.
many of the themes and ideas in that song are kind of reflected again on Famous Prophets, which is the other really long song on the album, and which
Yeah,
is
it's and
the
it's like, I
second to
feel
last
like their
track.
placement is sort of a mirror in some sense, like, you have, like, right at the beginning and then right at the end, like,
Yeah,
2 of the lengthiest songs with the most thematic significance.
it
The
is
the
very much like a
sequencing
mirror.
for this album is, like, it borders on indulgent, but actually kind of works in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I haven't really thought of it from that kind of angle, but that's true because it even the very like the actual first and last tracks are obviously connected, being like with the
Yeah,
twin fantasy.
literally, like, one title is My Boy, parentheses, Twin Fantasy, and then the other is Twin Fantasy, parentheses, Those Boys.
Yeah, and then even on like kind of moving in closer to the center, you get the sober to death, high to death mirror type of thing.
Yeah, like that,
There's
like,
a lot of that going on.
again, it's like a duality of, like, this thing
Yeah,
has been corrupted in a way that feels like you can't move back from it.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And I I feel like, like, to go back to the recording talk, like, in some sense, like, the ideal of the 2018 version is a very different ideal from the one of the 2011 version. The 2011 version, like, musically sounds like this constant dreamlike haze because that's pretty much what it was projected as in a story,
yeah,
as like a dream.
and
And
yeah,
then, like, Toledo manages to put those hooks so well together in this, like, state that feel it makes you just feel almost delirious, like, when you get to the peak of Bodies and it's just like they're singing, like, 3 different hooks on top of each other at
yeah.
once.
Yeah. I mean, hey, good segue into Bodies here, because yeah,
One of
Bodies
the
is
best songs of the decade, perhaps?
it's ridiculous that it even exists, because like you just said, it's got three of genuinely the best hooks ever, three hooks all in one song, and then there's a part where they're all playing on top of each other. Um,
And it kind of works in a way, like, and, like, it's just it continually blows my mind that the 2011 version, like, even its primordial form has that energy to it, like,
yeah,
that electricity that is, like, you feel like this is the kind of song that could fill up a room. And
it's
then, like,
yeah.
with the 2018 version, it feels like he's genuinely trying to fill up a stadium.
I mean, yeah, it's first of all, I'm sure I'll say this 100 times, but it's genuinely just crazy to me that Body is like the original version was made just in GarageBand with a laptop mic. Like the fact that it has that much energy with what was available to him is like truly astonishing. And I also just like, of course, relate really hard to just like the general kind of social anxiety he's describing in this track, going back and forth between like being uncomfortable and nervous about like dancing with someone at a party while simultaneously like having a good ass time. And it's like it sounds like a party track. Actually, I heard someone describe this as like a lo-fi LCD sound system song.
I mean, honestly, like, I feel like there is some James Murphy influence, especially, like, the, 2018 version of it feels like an actual James Murphy song in some sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's got that sort of like electronic dance punkiness to it. I could definitely kind of see that comparison. And like there is a charm to the sort of lo-fi version of Bodies, but I think that if there's any song that is kind of boosted with like a more cleaned up production sound, it's got to be this song, just because it's so overtly like poppy. Like,
Yeah, I feel like the great reward of Will Toledo's attempt to, like, kind of dig out of the, very claustrophobic and chaotic sound of the original and make these songs into, like, genuine pop songs, because that feels
yeah,
like his goal that he was trying to accomplish it with the new versions of all the songs, and, like, Bodies gets rewarded so heavily because it
yeah,
is literally just, like, the pop song of the album.
no, definitely,
It
and it's like right in the center too, man.
Yeah, it's like the centerpiece of the album pretty much for, not to say that every song is a centerpiece because it's like
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of like the literal center, though.
Yeah,
I feel like
like
doesn't make more sense.
it's just like to quote him again, like it's a very manic sort of hyper real state it goes into.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Also, I love the new version, the Andrew at the end
Oh
of
yeah,
it on the music
one
narration.
trait danger cameo.
Yeah, well, so what's so funny? I was listening to that today, and I forgot that we
It
actually
happens.
we well that it happens, and that we actually interviewed Andrew on the podcast, and I asked him about that, and he's just I can't remember what he said, but it was basically just like I don't know, we were just fucking around, and I was like okay,
I mean, I feel like throwing in bullshit just because you can feels like a good excuse.
yeah, right. I mean, why not? Yeah, the first one trait cameo, man.
The first one trait danger cameo of several
I was
in
gonna say
the
it,
car seat headrest
and
history.
I'm assuming there will be
There
more
will.
to come
There will.
soon.
You watch out for Hollywood, folks.
Oh my god, I don't even know. I don't even know.
Oh Lord. But yeah, like I feel like just the manic energy of this song perfectly captures that feeling of like you don't know how this perfect moment is going to sustain itself in any sense, and like it feels like it could just fall apart at any second.
Hmm. No. Also, I mean, I one of my favorite, I think, transitions, or not necessarily transitions, but one of my favorite uh like song sequences on Twin Fantasy is for sure got to be Bodies into Cute Thing. I feel like those two songs are sort of like
Oh yeah, definitely. They're like the peak of like the weird like fantasized horny haze that is the
Mhm.
middle of this album.
I love the first line. I got so fucking romantic, I apologize, which to me feels like directly referencing like Bodies. Like
I mean, yeah, in some sense.
it's just like I don't know. I feel like it's clever, like in that kind of like self-referential way again, which is like this whole thing, honestly.
Yeah, like, and I feel like a lot of this album deals in the sense of like the metatextual, like,
Yeah,
but both knowing like the perspective this album is coming from in each version, and like also like referencing within itself, like as there's reprisals later, and like references to outside works that you need to know, like
yeah, right.
on this song cute thing, like there is of course the interpolation and reference to Anna Ing by They Might Be
Yeah,
Giants,
yeah,
which
exactly.
is used very brilliantly. Like it almost is as good as the original Anna Ing, which is also a perfect pop song.
Yeah, and thank God John Linnell has not come after Will Toledo for
Oh
that one.
no, like the Johns, Flansburgh, and Linnell, they love Car Seat Headrest.
That's great to hear.
And so apparently like they loved the songs, and so Will hit them up just to make sure like the copyright was okay, and they're just like, yeah, it's cool. You can do it.
Hell yeah. Okay,
Which
so
honestly makes sense.
this is what I was actually gonna ask you earlier when I was talking about the wrong song is like your thoughts on him changing Dan Behar and John Entwistle to Frank Ocean and James Brown.
Well, I feel like once again, like it becomes from a change in time and perspective. Like, like in 2011 to let me just in 2011, he's much more of like a like you see his music is informed a lot more by like just plain old rock music, like
Right.
like he references fucking Pink Floyd and all that shit, and like dad
Yeah.
rock, and like
The
it
Beach
makes sense
Boys
that a
and
kid like
yeah.
him would be really into like Dan Behar and the Who.
Yeah,
Like
right.
those things make sense, and then you look at him now and he's like this guy who's like really into pop and like perfectly written songs, and it makes sense that like his ideals would be somebody
Hmm.
like Frank Ocean, who has like the most beautiful voice that just makes like perfect pop songs,
Right.
perfect weird pop songs, and then James Brown, who is just like a fucking god of like performance.
Yeah, exactly. I would yeah, agree pretty much 100%. It definitely fits more
It
for
fits his
2018.
character in some sense.
Yeah. Um this song also you said Bodies could be like like a stadium anthem. I feel similarly
Oh,
to
this
the
one
new
is like
version of Cute
also
Thing. Yeah.
Yeah, this one is like fucking huge, to put
It's
it
like a
simply.
stadium power rock song or something. Like it's just gets
Like,
so loud.
people refer to like Nervous Young Inhumans as like, oh, it sounds like the Killers kind of, or like Body sounds kind of like the fucking Strokes or LCD Sound System, but like this is
Right.
just like big beefy rock bands. Like that's the only
Hell
way to
yeah.
put it, especially in the like 2018 version feels like this really awkward kind of really jangly kind of
Yes.
song. It almost struggles to find footing, but like I think the second half like uh I'm trying to find the exact spot in the original because it's it's the part where they go doo 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 doo.
Oh
Oh,
yeah. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
before he died in an explosion. Okay, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that part. But like that specific part, like the guitars in the 2011 version, like they kind of hit there. I'm not gonna lie. Like
Oh yeah.
he finds his footing finally because like that opening, it's like
Yeah. I specifically actually wrote down that the guitar work on the original Q thing is like really beautiful actually, and I don't really
it's
fully
really
understand.
indulgent. It almost like it treads the line between like kind of beautiful and awkward in a way that I
Yeah.
think only like somebody who's still like getting a hold of their skills could.
Yeah. And specifically that like died in an explosion bridge where it's like not it's kind of like the
Oh yeah, the burr, dur, dur, dur,
yeah, it's like
dur,
not
dur.
distorted
Yeah,
or anything like that. I just think it like works really well and I'm always like how did he get that tone from again, like how did he do that with what he had available to
with
him?
like a home recording setup and probably a shitty pedal or two,
Because it sounds kind of genuinely very like
unplugged.
hazy and haunting kind of like I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, like I think one of the words that gets thrown around a lot with like discussion of the sound and like the lyrics on this is very ephemeral. Like
Yeah.
it feels like something that is like delicately built.
Yeah. And I would say that probably applies more like more to the 2011 version obviously before it like was specifically re-recorded to I feel like kind of beef it up in a way at least like you know from the sonic perspective or whatever so
Yeah,
it's a banger.
and I feel like yeah, we just chopped down the horny section of the album.
Yeah, pretty much actually that we just
Because
went right
like
into it.
yeah, and now we're gonna jump back,
Yes.
of course, because I feel like talking about some of the other areas is more important for the later section of the album when you really need to have like
Yeah.
to put it simply the perspective. Like you need to really have been like I feel like the later songs are more dependent on your enjoyment of the earlier ones
Yes.
because it informs that perspective of the later.
No, I agree completely. Would you want to like I don't know maybe talk about like sober to death or something?
I feel like I'm going to talk about the early area in general, other than
Oh
beach
sure.
life, because we've already like dived into beach life a bit, and we will return to beach life again.
Yes.
But like the early section is just like this really sim like I feel like the early section doesn't have like other than beach life is like kind of devoid of some of those crazy guitar effects and shit. He's just like playing really simple and catchy melodies in a way that
Yeah.
works
I mean, like
perfectly.
My Boy is pretty much like that. Like it's fairly simple kind of song
Yeah.
structurally.
So as I was getting into it, the cold open of this podcast, like I feel like this is very much inspired by that kind of 60s pop in particular. Like the intro that everyone knows for this album is this drum beat that just goes bum, 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 bum. And that is very much inspired by like that Runettes Be My Baby style intro
Yeah.
that like is ubiquitous in pop. Like even with the 2011 version, it's clear that he had like good instincts of like how that kind of thing works.
Yeah, and even like just kind of mentioning the '60s kind of like jangly uh, guitar work on this thing is sort of an interesting because I mean people of course have this sort of perception of super lo-fi music like this that it just sounds shitty, which like is true to an extent, but I feel like it sort of undermines the legit chops that this song has. Like
Oh yeah, like I
there's like
feel
some
like
really beautiful guitar on it.
Yeah, I think the earlier version of the album, like, so we were, for context, we were chatting earlier. We've been kind of prepping for this show the
Yeah.
past few days, like just listening to the album and talking. And yesterday I talked some serious smack. I was like, oh yeah, I don't think 2011 My Boy has that much to it. Or no, wait, was it 2018 version or 2011 that version that was this? I think it was 2018 version. My Boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, it was Face to Face, My Boy, but listening to 2018 or 2011 version of My Boy yesterday, I was like just kind of intently sitting along, and I was like, "Oh yeah, this is nice." And like I was like, "Wow, I don't remember the 2018 version being nearly this good." That was like nearly the exact thing I messaged you.
Right.
And then today I listened to 2018 and I was like, "Well, shit, I was
Yep.
wrong." Because like the 2011 version is kind of just this like, as with everything else on the 2011 album, is like this kind of beautiful haze, like like the delicate guitar stands out in a way that like sits above like the rest of the very muddy work. And then like the 2018 version instead decides to like do the uh, like it does the exact same parts and everything, but the production, the way it goes is like it kind of just slowly lulls you in, and then when you hit like the first real verse,
Yeah.
like the real verse when they're starting to sing My Boy, we don't see each other much, like it punches you in a way that I
Yeah.
like. It's incredibly smart production.
Apparently, just like a random tidbit is so My Boy was the first song that they recorded when they were recording the face to face version. And they actually recorded it in Chicago the exact same day that they played at Pitchfork which is the only time I ever saw them.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I remember him
Yeah,
renting that in interview. Like, oh hell yeah!
fucking me out here like 3 times having seen them now.
I mean, I wish I could have.
And if their tour gets postponed and keeps all the same dates, I'm probably gonna see them 2 more times
Yeah, yeah. I do really I was very much intending to see them in May.
on
At
the
this
on the
point,
upcoming
I'm
tour.
kind of waiting, but yeah.
We'll see where that goes in the future if they get
Right,
around to
right.
it.
Yeah, right. Um, but I was just kind of thought that was funny. I was like, oh, that was like the same day I saw him. Well, you were at that show, right? The
No, I was not. I see. I was at the next year Pitchfork and the year
Oh, got
after
it.
that, but I was not at the Car Seat Headrest
Not
year.
at the car seat one. Yeah, it was. I mean, it was so long ago.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it was lovely.
Yeah, it was good. Mostly like Teens of Denial stuff, but it's just
Yeah, yeah,
like
of course, because it's
kind
like
of
promo cycle stuff.
yeah. Well, no, he did play Black Star at that show actually. That was
Oh
one of the
yeah,
ones.
yeah, that was back during like the weird era of 2016.
Yeah, right. Which hey, I mean, Black Star comes up on this album. It gets
Oh
brought.
yeah, yeah, later on, and
Yeah,
like, so I've seen them 3 times now, and the amount of Twin Fantasy tracks I keep getting, and like the ones that they play are always like really interesting picks, of course.
right.
Like
Yeah,
the first time I caught them was like in a tinier room than the one they have ended up playing every time they tour near me.
that's kind of fun.
And it was this really sweaty gathering, and they played Cute Thing and Sober to Death.
Damn.
Fucking and
Just
Cute
pull.
Thing, I will say, goes incredibly hard when most of the people in the room know the words and are just like sweaty and dancing along to it. And then the second time was around when they were starting to really get into the Twin Fantasy recording cycle, and they dropped Famous Prophets on me, which was
Oof.
like I
Damn.
was sitting outside of the venue during sound check, and I heard the bass line for the song, and I was immediately just like, "No, you can't do this."
What they did.
Oh my god, and of course, like, fucking Twin Fantasy 2018 tour, like, when they finally got around to, like, playing it, and then they played more Teens of Denial song than Twins Fantasy songs every night.
That is really funny.
That's the funniest part of that tour is, like, they're just like, "Oh, yeah, This is the Twin Fantasy tour, right? How about like half and half Twin Fantasy and Teens of Denial? That's what you guys want, right?
I feel like there is a large contingent of like Car Seat Headrest fans that are probably like exclusively familiar with Teens of. I mean, I don't know about it at this point.
Like
Like,
exclusively the hi-fi era. And
right?
then not to
Yeah,
be
yeah,
not to be reductive and say like, oh, these people should know better, but like it's at the same time, it's like, oh man, I kind of wish we had more of like the deep cuts.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would love a show where he just like plays literally nervous young man, like front to back, and that's all.
Somebody told me they have like a giant amount of the back catalog rehearsed, but they never play it,
The hell? Well, maybe. Hey, I mean,
including
this tour,
including like Broken Birds, and it's just like, what on earth, Will
like,
Toledo, you bastard.
I could see them pulling out some deep cuts on this upcoming tour, especially
Oh,
if they're gonna
same.
kind of be bringing some more, I don't know, like
Electronic
electronic
instrumentation.
like infrastructure. They could probably pull out some of
But I
the.
feel like that is extremely the discussion for another time.
Yeah, totally, totally. Yeah, fair.
But yeah, I feel like nothing can be described. I feel like the immense strength of this album could not be described better than the final time I saw them, when it got to the end of the show and like the band had just finished playing something soon and they hadn't come out for an encore yet, and the entire crowd is just chanting "Beach Life" repeatedly.
Did they do
Like
it?
literally, like nearly everyone in the room was just shouting "Beach Life" over and over.
And did you get Beach Life?
He fucking played it. He came back out, and that was the only song they played for the encore, and that's all anyone needed.
That counts as like a 4 song encore, to be honest.
I mean, it's 3 songs in one.
Yeah, exactly.
Just the immense power that that song has, that people are like, this is the only song I'm here for.
It's a fun, like underrated aspect of just kind of Twin Fantasy as a whole. Back to the sequencing of the album. I love that
Oh,
Beach
yeah.
Life is sandwiched between you get My Boy, which is like kind of a short,
And the
somewhat
other one
simple
we haven't
song, and
discussed.
then yeah, it just goes into Stop Smoking, which is this like this little tiny. I don't know how
This,
long it is, like 2 minutes maybe.
yeah, like 2 minutes ish acoustic little song that's just like literally the lyrics are, stop smoking, we love you, and we don't want you to die.
Yeah, exactly, and it's like I don't know. There's I guess there's not a lot to really be said about this song. Like it didn't really get changed that much from version to version because it's like what
It's
does it
just
really
like a
change?
nicer sounding one. Like the old one, like everything else sounds like it was recorded in a cave.
In like yeah, like it's almost like all hail West Texas like boombox level of
See,
like
I think All Hail West Texas lo-fi is very different from Twin Fantasy lo-fi, because All Hail West Texas is like defined by that hideous tape hiss that you get
that's
when you
true.
record on a broken Panasonic boombox,
I'm
and
gonna
Twin Fantasy just sounds like it was recorded in a cave.
That's fair. I'm gonna stop bringing up Nervous Young Man after this. I just want to say that Goodbye Love on Nervous Young Man does sort of have that like tape hissiness to it. Every time I hear it, I'm like, man, this sounds like it should be a like an All Hail West Texas B side. But it's like just specifically that one song.
The same energy,
Yeah, exactly.
that little acoustic. I feel like it's sort of a really good intro into Sober to Death, especially on the newer version.
Yeah,
Like the newer, like fucking the older version feels like just a similar acoustic sort of thing, but then like Sober to Death 2018 version feels like a genuine like ballad comparatively.
yeah. So I mean, I remember the first time I heard this song because this is like the first I feel like Car Seat Headrest song that I actually like got into really hard. Like the first time I listened to Twin Fantasy, this is definitely the one that kind of stuck out to me. I just remember like laying in my bed being like, "What the fuck am I listening to right now?" Like this is like such a distinct memory. Um, like I don't know. It's he really knows how to make the quote unquote lo-fi aspects of his music kind of fit and make coherent sense. Like the atmosphere on the original Sober to Death is like genuinely like haunting, and the guitar sounds really good, and the way that it's kind of like cut and skips around at the end is just like really creative for the 10th time for like the resources that he had available to him. I guess you could say that also. I guess you could say there's sort of like like a certain level of unhealthiness to this song
I
as
mean,
far
like
as like
literally, part of the reason that Will does not like this song, like, is because it is very much a basic description of a very toxic relationship, something that
yeah.
like a mentality towards the relationship that doesn't work.
the sort of mentality of like finding comfort and maybe even like finding romance and like mutual sadness and like mutual like mental health issues is like I mean, it's definitely not like a healthy attitude to have towards that sort of thing, but also this is an album made by an emotional teenager.
Exactly. It's like this is somebody who obviously does not have the sort of maturity to understand that what they're saying is fucking ridiculous. Like he's literally singing like I want to hear you going psycho.
Yeah,
Like
right. And I don't know if it's necessarily for that reason, but
yeah.
my hot take that I'm going to insert in here is that this is definitely one area where I think I very firmly prefer the mirror to mirror version. Just mainly because, like, I mean, I think the face to face version is like totally just fine. I just think that it wasn't like revisited with like the exact same level of like nuance as some of the other ones, where if it sort of almost feels like it was just re-recorded, like kind of note for note. Um,
I mean in some sense yeah, but like also there's like underlying piano harmonies that kind of get put in
I
the
do like the harmonies. Yeah,
like
that is one.
those are really a great addition. I feel like that's the thing about the re-recording is most of the touches other than like the really really obvious places that
Yeah,
happen mostly in the second half of the album, it plays much more subtly in a way.
yeah, and I think like there's absolutely nothing wrong with the new version. I think that one of the
Yeah,
main
absolutely.
appeals to me of the old version specifically is just I really like the ending section because it kind of feels like, I mean, it kind of sounds like shit and like it sounds like it's falling apart at the seams, and I feel like that kind of sonically fits into the like how I interpreted it thematically, I guess.
Yeah, like so pretty much like the ending version of the song sounds extremely rudimentary because it's basically just like rapid switching in the recording between like these little plucky acoustic guitar parts and like strums on the acoustic guitar that are very hard, and then like an actual electronic part that sounds much more
Yeah,
harsh. Or
yeah,
not
and it kind of like
electronic.
puts.
I just said electronic guitar. Jesus Christ. But yeah,
I
electric
always did that.
guitar.
Yeah, it kind of skips. It almost is like it's almost like panned. I don't think it is pan. Is it actually? It might be panned like back and forth ear to ear too. So you get like the kind of acoustic in one side, and then you get the. I don't know if that's real or not, or if I'm just making that up. It seems like it's a thing that happens.
Yeah, I think it does kind of pan between the ears, like the not quite hard stereo pan like Beatles, but there is like some slight panning in the original.
Yeah, yeah.
In a way, and it's like maybe one of the most beautiful sections on the album is like that little outro.
Yeah, love it. I mean, that was I feel like that just speaking to the kind of moments on this album that really stand out. Like that particular moment, like that outro
Yeah,
section
like
of Sober to Death.
little musical ideas that I feel like somebody who was like actually playing in a professional sense would not be like, this is really impractical and stupid.
Right.
But like somebody who's like, and I don't want to say amateur, but like is still, getting a sense of what's practical in recording music would do it anyway just because they can.
Yeah, I think it's fair to call 2011 Will Toledo an amateur
Yeah, true.
producer.
I mean, he doesn't know how to play bass or drums
Yeah,
still,
right.
so yeah, that's so fucking sober to death. Beach life, like they all go around in way like I feel like the arc of this album kind of goes around in a way that makes very logical sense. You
It
you
does.
have you have the kind of desperately sad but also romantic section. Then you have the really horny and weird one in the middle, and then you have the crushingly horrible 20 minutes of just whatever
Um,
the fuck is at the end.
yeah, so I mean, like, I feel like Sober to Death pretty squarely like mirror segues into High to Death. Another
Yeah,
two
because
songs that are kind of connected. Not like obviously in the name. Uh,
other than the name and also like the mirroring with the earlier track "Stop Smoking" interpolation,
yeah,
which I'll get into.
yeah. So I mean, just a couple things about High to Death. Like this song, well, especially the original version, is exactly. It sounds exactly like how it feels to be too high. So he kind of like nailed that
It
right off the
sounds like you're
bat.
fucking dying, like in the
Yeah,
original version. This is one of the few songs where I think like maybe the only song on 2018 version where I feel like the production choices genuinely neutered the experience that the new one has
I
compared to
have,
the old, because like the old one feels like of course I'm going back to the fucking cave.
yeah,
But like it feels like you were surrounded by this song in a way that's like just like you can't escape it in a sense. And then like 2018 goes for like a more dreamlike and kind of haunting quality than anything.
yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I mean, the original High to Death is probably the most lo-fi song on this already very lo-fi album, and I think that works really well here because it feels like a swirl of sound that's sort of enveloping you, and you can't make out the lyrics. You can't really understand like exactly what's happening besides like the melody, and I just sort of think that fits in really well with like I guess the point of the song.
Yeah, like it's just this delirious haze in the entire
Hmm.
time where you feel like you are fucking dying.
I will say I agree with that. I agree that I like the kind of like ambiance of the original version. However, I absolutely
This
love
the ending section of
the
2018.
overexposed enjoy. Yeah, like the
Yeah,
whole
like that's
interpolation
the
there.
thing about the 2011 version. So the 2011 version ends with this like kind of so I'm gonna get into both because like it's both lengthy endings, but 2011 kind of gets into the lines of I said hell's the sun burning forever, the sin of things, and then it finally gets into this weird sort of double interpolation of a Pink Floyd song, Jug Band Blues, which was the
Yep.
last song with Sid Barrett on it. And
Oh, I
it
didn't
sort
even know
of
that.
ties that as well with like how exactly can we escape from behind the wall, which is a reference to, of course, the wall,
Right.
which of course is like a really fucking obvious muse for Will in the early era. Like
Yeah.
the fucking Roger Waters worship is absurd, but at the same time, I respect the craft.
Yeah.
And then the 2018 version, in contrast, has Will, like really showing the perspective of a fucking time that comes with it, and like he interpolates a song on Overexposed slash Enjoy
mhm.
from Monomania, which, if Twin Fantasy is the romance album, that is the real breakup album, even though
Yeah.
this is already the breakup album.
Yeah. I mean, Monomania definitely is like a slightly more, I guess, bleak
Mean.
version of Twin Fantasy. Yeah, and I mean, it's got like the burning like lame zone comics as the cover, and like I just think it's sort of interesting that like not necessarily interesting, but I do think it makes total sense that he would interpolate at least something from that album onto this new version because I do think they're sort of inherently tied together in a lot of ways, and especially that whole part at the end about having like where he
Yeah,
has
well,
that
like the
high
thing
school
is,
student
like
talk.
that song interpolates us fucking sober to death from the original, like
Right.
Overexposed,
Yeah,
in the
that's true.
same part that Will is actually referencing. So it's like a weird meta layer. Like that's how deep this album keeps going. Is it's like an interlocking grid of ideas that I think like both versions feel like these ideas that are interlocking in a way that like without the other it
Yeah,
wouldn't exist.
there's some like intense levels of like meta shit happening because like the whole part at the end about like the student who has this conflicting relationship with like the art that she
Yeah,
had made in the
so
past.
to I can actually tell a little bit about this because I like
Yeah.
researched it ages ago. So like, pretty much like the next thing he does is he takes out a phone audio thing. This is somehow is the second album on our top 10 that has a phone skit in it, other
Yeah.
than Good Kid, Mad City.
Well, I mean, and then Blonde eventually.
Yeah, well, Blonde is the third and final, but like, it's just funny how this contrasts because like pretty much like what he does here is he gets a excerpt from an audio guide towards a series of art by Hojin Sel Jung. She did the single artwork for Beach Life and Death and the Nervous Young and Humans 2018 versions of this album.
Okay, okay.
And then in reference, like she did this series called The Lady, which if you've never seen it before, I like highly recommend you look it up. Like literally I have one of the paintings as the background of my phone because they're just
Oh,
like they're all very evocative portrayals of like femininity in a way. Like
yeah,
some of them are like these very one of them is just this very delicate painting that's just like a plain white background with a and like they're all mostly faceless people.
right.
One is like this lady with billowing hair and just like you can see her lips and that's the only feature on her. And then the other is like somebody dragging their head against a wall in a way that looks just like blood. It's very violent
Yeah,
and insane. And like the way she talks about it in this voicemail is like she says like it was an intense process and she was trying to personify that intensity. Eh, and it's hard to talk about her now, quote, because I think she wasn't me, and at least that's how I feel. And maybe there is a different form now that the intensity takes. And that I feel like is a great fucking thesis statement for why the 2018 exists is because like
yeah,
fundamentally it's the same album, like the same emotions are all still there, but it's taking a different form with that emotional ball.
yeah. Right, exactly.
It's hard to recategorize, it's hard to recount it in the way that you may have done when you made it, but at the same time like you can still go back even if it's just like a weird fantasy.
And not to skip around too much or to stray too far, but I feel like almost lays that out like explicitly, like at the very end of the album, like
Yeah,
the
yeah,
end of
like
Twin
that
Fantasy.
especially like with both versions, I feel like it's extremely obvious on both versions.
Just like the whole like these are only lyrics now, kind of like trying to hammer home this like the visceral emotion and like the actual like experience, like those feelings that were just like kind of right on the surface. Kind of over time, I feel like he is, I don't know, it feels almost optimistic to me, like he's kind of free from that, like, oh hell yeah, these are only lyrics now.
Yeah, yeah, like this romance is over and I can't see any more for us, but these are only lyrics now anyway.
Right, exactly. And yeah, that's kind of a direct commentary on the fact that there are two albums now, and it's also like perfectly
Like
paralleled like with what that like girl's actually saying in the voicemail. So it's just like so many layers.
metatextual. It's
Yeah.
perhaps this is one of the like just an album with this many layers of meta commentary built into it is inherently very weird, especially when there's two versions of it
Yeah,
that build
exactly.
upon each other. Like I feel like there's very few other album experiences that can be seen this way. Like even in this decade.
Yeah, it's like if I'm like trying to I was like trying to get my brother into Twin Fantasy, and it's almost like I have to be like, okay, here's some albums you need to listen to first, and
Here's like
also
a guide.
read Frankenstein by Mary Shelley.
And so the other very lengthy track that we need to discuss that is kind of like
Yes.
a parallel to Beach Life and so many of the other songs on this album, like again, like every song on this album kind of mirrors the other.
Yes, and also what is the unequivocal greatest song of all time.
I mean,
Um,
every song on this album is the greatest song of all time. As
it's true.
with Japanese Breakfast is Soft Sounds from Another Planet, I kept listening to this album being like, is this the greatest song of all time? Oh shit, no, it's the
I,
next one.
I wonder how many times this line will come up just throughout the Decade series. Like, this is the greatest song of all time.
It's a good question because like this song in particular is very heavily altered compared to the original.
Hmm.
It
Yeah,
got a whole 1021, yeah, nearly 4 minutes added to it as if it was not long enough
I
already.
know. Um,
And I
yeah.
think that that's actually no wait, hang on. Actually 6 minutes.
Damn. Well,
Good
there's where like
lord.
half the 10-minute extra content comes from, is from Famous Prophets right here.
Yeah, like half the extra content on this album just comes from Will like finally finishing the song. Like
Yeah, right.
because like basically it's clear that the song was meant to be like longer originally, but he couldn't figure out how to do it. And so, for people who purchased Nervous Young Man and paid like a certain amount, Will gave out a outtakes album called Disjecta Membra,
Yes,
which has like
it's got
some
some good stuff on there.
mostly kind of inconsequential stuff. Like there's a
Hmm.
really nice Leonard Cohen cover that makes him sound like an absolute fuckboy.
And then there's the sober to death like kind of demo version is on
Oh
there.
yeah, like Dream Encounter on Smoke Mountain is another good one.
What's the oh, Drunk on a Work Night, the greatest song of all time. I don't know if you're super familiar with that one, but
I've listened. I have not listened to more than fucking hell. I just opened the lyrics to this.
Drunk on a Work Night is the most nuts song of all time.
Oh my god, I'm gonna die.
Yeah, it's
I've
like
never seen this before. It's just like this is insanity.
it's insanity. It's like the first time I heard it, I was like, "What is this?" And then I listened to it like 5 times, just over the course of time, and I'm like, "Man, this is actually
Reading
good."
the lyrics reminds me of the first time I listened to that one. I can't remember which one it is on the numbered album, but it's like the one where he's screaming about the coffee house.
Yeah,
Oh
it's just like
god,
so. Yeah, um,
weird and needless.
but I'm
But
assuming where you're going with this is like the Pain Star.
yeah, so in District Membra, there is a B-side called Pain Star, parentheses, If Heaven is Full of People. It is very clearly like meant to be an add-on to Famous Prophets slash Minds, but Will clearly never found a way to incorporate it.
Yes. Um,
And then 2018 finally figures it out, and it is somehow like absolutely insane.
yeah, I mean, I remember the first time I listened to the new version of Twin Fantasy, I like got it loaded up and then I actually went like driving around because it was like nighttime and I just want to listen to it in my car. And I remember like
Smarter than me.
yeah. And I remember the first time where that like piano part comes in on Famous Prophets and he starts singing this whole different thing and I'm like, "Wait, what the fuck is going on right now?"
Yeah, like I drank the Will Toledo Kool-Aid very extensively already, as
Yeah.
we discussed it privately in our chat. But like, I was so on board for this album because this is like A, one of my favorite rock albums of all time. B, it's an album that is like fundamental to my understanding of rock music as a whole.
Right.
And C, like, of course, having my favorite album get perfected, like fixed, I guess, in a way would make me excited. Like
Yeah.
any sort of album that I like, it's like, oh yeah, that little thing you don't like, it's like this is going to be fixed. And so yeah, it feels like like this action of remaking it feels like a culmination of the Matador years where it's like he's finally putting to rest all of that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's kind of I don't know, like I feel like the song itself thematically again with like all this like metatextual stuff like that's also kind of like what it's about in a weird way like because I
Yeah,
don't know
literally
his
the first line is apologies to future me's and you's. Like it's a
yeah
sort of meta acknowledgement about like this is not going to none of this is going to make sense in the future to us because it's all fucked.
yeah and I love that he so in the original version he ends the song with this kind of like with this like Bible verse um and then in the new song he actually interpolates a completely different Bible verse from the original one to explore this whole theme of sort of wanting to revisit a past version of yourself and it kind of adds an extra layer of depth to the lyric we gotta go back I think as well just like as he's screaming like those lines from that kind of meta angle it also takes on a whole new meaning.
Yeah, like I feel like the original song is more a sort of feeling of being left alone and like wondering like what you did to deserve this in a sense. It's a very petty and childish thing of like, I
Right.
fucking hate this. I don't like this feeling. I want it to go away. And like there's the reinterpretation of the ocean washed over your grave lines.
Yes.
Like and to yeah, so to quote Will's own words here, somebody asked him on Tumblr like 7 years ago Somebody asks, "The ocean washed over your grave. That's in a few songs. What's the meaning behind it?" He says, "Yeah, that's a recurring theme on Twin Fantasy, paired with the ocean washed open your grave. It's about being unable to keep your feelings for someone buried. They keep resurfacing long after you thought they were gone." And in some sense, it's the feeling of like you're trying to come back to it, looking for what those feelings were,
And
in a
yeah, and that
sense.
plays into the like very act of re-recording the album and like revisiting these kind of ideas and like events, I guess.
Yeah, like the verse about go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord is about to pass by. And then, they keep seeing all these different revelations, these signs, but the Lord is not in any of them. And then there's just a sound of sheer silence. Like it's defined by absence.
I love that part. That's just like pushes all of my right buttons. Like
It,
this, the sound of sheer silence followed by like just actual silence.
yeah, like the way the song just ends right there. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's like mid bass line too. It like doesn't end on the right note. It just like actually gets kind of like chopped off. It almost sounds like premature. It's just so cool.
Yeah, like, and then in contrast, the Bible verse that's chosen for the end of them portrays this idea of like completeness, like, and greater understanding, like moving on. Like when I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. At the end of my childhood, I put these ways behind me. For now, we see only as a reflection, as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Like
Oof,
that
yeah,
is the 2018 album.
I know,
It
and it's
is
like
an
just
acknowledgement.
even that level of, I mean, I don't know. I don't want to say like poetry or whatever, but just like kind of the way that that is phrased and structured in comparison with just like the visceral I'm a sad angry teenager fuck you like kind of attitude of a lot of the original album is just like another really kind of cool contrast.
Oh yeah, like I feel like the 2018 version, like it manages to both it manages to like not only acknowledge the pain that was found in the original, but like also like how it was an unfair perspective, I guess to say, and like
Yeah,
the ephemeral nature of it, because like one of the little pieces of mythology that he kind of mines in the newer album is this idea of the Pain Star, which was
hmm,
something from one of Kate Wirtz's comics, which is like this thing that visits only once every 1,000 years, and when you touch it, you feel the most unimaginable pain in the universe. And like it's this thing that's like it's an experience. Do like similar simultaneously like do you want to feel it, but also like it will hurt you.
yeah, it's such cool imagery. I've always loved the whole paint star concept.
Yeah,
Um,
like every part of this like final section of Famous Prophet Stars is like absolutely insane because he gets into the original just turns into this like bassy guitar dirge that sounds like it is a sinking ship. It's
right.
just slowly descending into hell. And like in contrast, Stars feels like this like almost beautiful work that's slowly kind of ascending instead. Like will like slowly kind of like his vocals get a little bit more patchy in the production, then it just eventually like all cuts out and
Right.
it's just him and the piano in that section, and it's like one of the most heartbreaking things you can listen to.
Well, here's a question for you. Would you touch the pain star?
I don't know, I need to know what the fuck happens when you touch it.
Yeah, true. I guess we don't know what happens when you touch the pain
But
star.
everyone keeps asking everybody keeps asking me if they can touch the Pain Star, buddy. They won't even let me touch
Oh my god, that's so cool.
it. I hate my brain.
That's really good though.
Yeah, and then like all those little things, like every line is sort of a meta acknowledgement of what he's trying to gain here.
Someone in the genius comments of
Oh god,
famous
genius
prophets,
comments.
yeah, they said that this 2018 famous prophets rips a hole straight through the space time continuum,
I'm not sure
which
what I like better, that or the weird gif of Will Ferrell drinking wine on a vibrating chair. Oh my god.
they're both apt in their own way.
I feel like it, and like I feel like this song is just like soul rending. Like you,
Yeah.
like both versions of it in their own way are just like the most painful thing that can exist. It's
I mean, I think Famous Prophets, I would have said probably is my favorite song on the 2011 version, like before the new one came out. And so like I remember the first time I heard it, I was like, how
there's no
is
way they
this?
can top that.
Yeah, I was like, how did he top this song that I already held in such high regard? Like already was like, man, this is the greatest song ever. And then like he just did that. Like he made it better
He
anyway.
really just like completely fucking flipped it around into something
Yeah.
wildly different.
Yeah. Um so I mean, I guess should we talk a little about those boys?
Those boys, they don't see each other much.
They don't not no, they don't. Which
That's
by the way, the genius
the fucking
annotation.
genius annotation. I was waiting for us to get to that. That is my favorite thing on the planet. So, fucking for years, I've laughed at the genius annotations that Will puts on his songs because he doesn't do them much anymore. But like on My Boy Twin Fantasy, the original 2011 version, if you go to the page, like on the line "My boy, we don't see each other much," Will has annotated it with the following interpretation: He doesn't see his boys much, and that's it.
That's it.
That's all you need to know.
I mean, yeah, it is what it is.
There's
You
like
just
some weird ass nerds in the comments trying to fix it, like, oh, this is this thing about K words. Fuck you. Like, shut up. He doesn't see his boys much.
he doesn't see his boys much. That's all you need to know.
He
um,
doesn't see them. This song somehow like you follow the most heartbreaking song on the planet with like yet another most heartbreaking song on the planet.
right. Um, I do like the opening line, which is from Sunburned Shirts, which is on both Teens of Style as well as My Back Is Killing Me Baby, and then now is on both versions of Twin Fantasy. So I
And
guess that.
also, there's a line that's on fucking a Nervous Young Men album as well.
Oh yeah. So I mean I feel like that's the line.
Meta
Yeah,
textual
it's
shit.
under
It's
like 6 layers.
like Will is perhaps like the people joke about him like stealing from other songwriters a lot. Like we've been doing that ourselves a lot. Like,
Right.
oh yeah, this guy, listen to him. He's like fucking going to the Roger Waters school of overextended rock songs. But like the person that Will takes the most lessons from is himself, and it's kind of like one of the most endearing qualities about a songwriter is
Yeah.
that like you hear these things reinterpreted and rephrased in these new ways that feel like ridiculous and entertaining when you hear them pop back up again.
And his whole discography is kind of like that. Like it's just interweaved in a way where ideas kind of show up here and there, and they'll get like repurposed on like different projects, sort of all throughout his whole huge discography. It's like that. So yeah, and I mean and especially on Twin Fantasy. Like I feel like that's sort of like all roads lead to Twin Fantasy when you're talking about like meta self-referential car seat headrest material.
Isn't that just all of it?
Yeah, right. I mean, yeah, this is a good song. I mean, I've sort of interpreted at least the 2018 version as being sort of like optimistic in a way. I don't know if that's just
Yeah, well, I feel like it's sort of him like coming back to it and looking like, okay, maybe I did do something right for myself.
right. You have the like "When I come back, you'll still be here" refrain, which I think is supposed to be sort of a contrast to the "Beach Life and Death," like "I came back and found you were gone" kind of thing. Um, and I don't know, it feels sort of like an acknowledgement of this whole like fantasy that he created and how it's like a
Yeah,
fantasy
like
and
it feels like a dissolution of it all. Like he has come to at least a self-acknowledgement about his own thing. Like literally in the original version, fucking the monologue at the end is just this is the part of the song where Will gives up. He dissociates himself from his own romance until it becomes just a fantasy.
right, yeah, exactly. It almost feels like a sort of I like
He
that
has rejoined society.
yeah, exactly. Um Yeah, I mean, and then interesting. Another tidbit that I found on Genius was that the apparently the vinyl version for Twin Fantasy 2018 ends on a locked groove, so like the last few seconds,
Oh yeah, the like
kind of
weird
loop
noise.
endlessly. Um, so it'll keep looping the sound until like you take it off yourself. It's
Yeah,
like a
like to fucking to quote the fucking 2018 version, like this is a version of me and you that can exist outside of everything else.
yeah, right,
Like
exactly,
literally, it's something like he acknowledges this story as like something that like is not necessarily based in reality and can just be like a memory more than anything. It's acknowledging the ephemeral nature of it. And I think that's that's why the song in the 2018 version is probably my favorite on the album of the 2018 version
ooh, that's a
because
spicy take that I like.
like like the lyrics are sort of the most beautiful summarization of like why he's doing this for himself, why the song exists, and like
Right,
also just like an acknowledgement in the original song that's just like beautiful, and then like the new version, like the music is such a huge boost up as well.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
Like, oh my god, it's just amazing. And like at the same time, like also the other thing in the lyrics is like the idea that these people in the story, they are literally inseparable. Like it's not just, like a romance. It's like they're connected at the back of the head with a conduit.
Right, yeah,
Like in the album cover,
yeah.
two dogs hugging.
And they both, and the eye of one dog is also
Like
the
yeah, the
nose
nose,
of the
like,
other one.
and the arms are like tied together.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like sort of a like literally it is like not just a romance. It is a literal connection at heart.
I'm actually looking at the album art right now, and it's like it looks like their arms form a ring that is just
Sort
like a
of.
straight, and then the two hands are just like two separate things, like that are connected to nothing.
That's also true. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean this might be just like reading too far into it to be like, man, the album cover is also like twin fantasy,
I mean,
but it kind
I
of,
think it literally I
but it
think it
is
is.
though.
That's the thing is like I think on every layer, like even the album art, which Will did himself for once on this,
Oh,
like
I didn't know that actually.
yeah, yeah, like Kate constantly is like, guys, I didn't make the album art. I did not make the Twin Fantasy art. Stop harassing me about it.
Yeah, I never actually knew that. I just assumed that she
Yeah,
had made
Will
that as
drew it
well.
himself and he like erased the pencil lines on the 2018 version.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's one of my favorite things that distinguishes the two is there's like shitty little pencil lines where you can see the tracing.
Right. That's so funny. I didn't even notice that was different either. Huh. Good stuff.
It's like so like everything about the recontextualization of this album is so brilliant and clever, and I think if just one of the if we had just been left with only the 2011 version, we wouldn't have had like nearly the wealth of like crazy and cool ideas that come into it.
So, okay, I'm gonna go way off the rails here for a second.
No, go ahead.
Um,
We're like in the back end of this. Like we've talked about every song, so like we
that's true.
can say anything we want.
So, one of my favorite books of all time is Don Quixote by Miguel
Oh
de
yes.
Cervantes. And that book is also very meta and very self referential. And the fun thing about it is that you get the first book, which is like the adventures of Don Quixote and Sancho. And then in the second book, the first book is like exists as a book in the world of the second book. So now Don Quixote and Sancho are like famous for their adventures of the first book, but now you're like in the second book and they're like celebrities from the book that you've like already read and are still reading. And it gets this, there's like all sorts of like kind of meta textual self-reference happening where it's like reality and fiction kind of like blurring together, and it very much reminds me of the same way that twin fantasy mirror to mirror and face to face operates, where it's like you have mirror to mirror and it's good by itself, but like just the very like existence of face to face adds like so many just layers and layers of like just reference that it's just kind
Yeah,
of like
like that's the
amazing.
thing is like 2011 version. I'm like, this could stand on its own as an album, but like 2018 brings it into something like incredibly crazy to look at.
And that's kind of back to what we said like in the very beginning, why this like entry in our decade list is for both albums, because they are, I feel like at this point for me anyway, they are inseparable. Like
Intrinsic, like
they're
they're
yeah, exactly. They're like two halves to the same whole. Like Twin Fantasy, the concept is both albums at once, like working together.
yeah, like fucking, and we keep talking about like, oh yeah, this is a thing that can be returned to. Literally, the last line of the album is, "When I come back, you'll still be here."
Yes, yeah, exactly. And it's like, and I love that the like the whole ending loop, the what am I trying to say? Like it loops endlessly at the end, like on the vinyl version. It just keeps looping until you take it off. Like the fantasy like lives on for as long as like you want it to. It's like everything, every little like nook and cranny of this like feeds back into like the thematic elements of the album. It's just so cool.
Yeah, it's like just this weird sort of acknowledgement of like our lives will go on, but in some sense, like this is so we are so tied to each other that we're not gonna like necessarily be able to just disappear
Right.
from each other's lives. Like
Yeah.
we will exist in that same space, even if it's just like the fantasized version of us.
Yeah.
And like, you know, like with just one, like again, this would be already a very incredible album, but like with the existence of both, it makes that is why I think it is one of the best albums of the decade. Like
Agree. Yeah. I feel
just
like yeah, very worthy of the spot that it finds itself in here.
yeah,
You know, that's why we're doing this, folks. We're in the top 10 albums of the decade. All right.
God, what a fucking album! Like
I know.
like when I start talking about stuff like this on like, you know, retrospective shows, I'm always like, wow, this is a lot. But like with this album, it's like I feel like even with us on a meta level, like there is the sense that like this has partially been this album has been a huge thing within our own friendship. Like for the past 5 years,
Yeah.
we've been fucking quacking about car seat headrest to each other in different chat rooms. Like, oh yeah, Twin
Exactly.
Fantasy, am I right?
Exactly. Well, you know what's so funny is I don't know if I remember this correctly or not because it was so long ago, but
If I was the one that introduced you to
I'm
it, like,
pretit sure you're the one that introduced me to Car Seat Headrest, like
there,
long ago in the Slack chat or something like
good
that.
lord, yeah,
Yeah.
like it is all like again, it's like growing up and you're like looking back on the moment of this thing, like, what the fuck?
Yeah. It's like the levels of meta is like a endless like fractal gif that just like keeps going on a loop forever. Like maybe reality is just twin fantasy. Like
Who
when you
fucking knows?
if you zoom into like atoms on a molecular level, it'll just be
Yeah,
twin
like
fantasy.
someday, fucking somebody just asks you if you have something against dogs, and you have a nervous breakdown. Like you wake up, you finally wake up.
Like yeah,
That's the
almost like
thing
in a
that wakes
cold
you up.
sweat. Yeah.
You're just like, oh,
Whoa. Yeah. Yeah,
oh, good
exactly.
lord, is that all, or do we have anything else that we really want to discuss? Because I feel like we've
I I think we did it. I think we
like
did
I
it.
feel like 3,000 words and an hour and 40 minutes of podcasting later, like I have literally said everything I can say about this album.
I agree. Yeah, this is honestly went longer than I thought it was going to. But it's like, how can you not go 2 hours talking about Twin Fantasy? Yeah,
How can you not go along about an album that is two albums, and B, an album that is one of the best rock records of the decade? Like, just of all the albums to go along about, of course it's this shit.
yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah, see you guys next for I think it's Blonde, but let me double check.
it
I had
is it is TPAB actually.
oh yeah, T-Pab, my bad. My brain was like already skipping ahead a few steps. Yeah, To Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar will be the next one in the series.
Which I'm not going to be on that episode,
I'm
but I'm
not either. We're both out after this point. I think. Like, are you on any episodes after this.
I'm like tentatively penciled in for Blonde, but we'll see
But yeah,
if they need
this is
me.
my sign off for the decade cast. Like after this, I am abdicated of my responsibilities.
Yes, I'm sure that'll be another long one, honestly. But if you made it this far, thanks for listening.
Oh yeah,
Um,
thanks for sticking with the absolute. Like I knew when I brought Jake in here, and like when nobody else signed up for it, like we are gonna go down the rabbit hole. Like,
oh yeah,
'cause,
we're going in.
like I feel like that happens to us every time we talk about car seat headrest.
Yeah, yeah, agreed.
And like just oh god.
Yeah, well, I
Yeah,
think this is good. This is some good content here, folks.
when you come back, we'll still be here. Peace out.
Hey, yes. All right. Goodbye.
When I